Understanding positional chess will help you outplay your opponents so that tactical opportunities can appear. In this video, I'm going to share 7 of the most important positional chess concepts which you need to know if you're going to advance in the game. So let's jump in. Lesson number 1. Opening the center tends to favor the side which is better developed. A great example of this occurred in Floor versus Pitshark 1930. It's black to move here, and if we do an evaluation, I think it's clear to see that black has better development. Now why is that? Well, let's look at the minor pieces. Black's minor pieces are all on good squares and are well coordinated. White's forces, on the other hand, are not so good. This knight on d2 doesn't really have a good destination square. The bishop on c1 is still on its starting square, and as a result, the two white rooks are not connected. So black has better development, and for that reason, black chose to open the center, starting with c takes d4. Now in the game, white chose to capture on d5. Let's take a look at what happens if white were instead to recapture on d4. Well, in this case, black could continue opening the center with d takes c4. And now white really has to recapture with the queen. If white captures a different way, then the pawn on d4 is under-defended. Black can simply take this. And this is often what will happen when one side is underdeveloped. A pawn or a square will be short of a defender, as is the case here. But after recapturing with the queen, then after simply rook to c8, this is very uncomfortable for white. And I think you could reach this position as black and already just be confident that you're much better. It's never a good idea as white to have your queen facing the enemy rook like this. So let's go back to the game, because after c takes d5, black recaptured with the queen, and after white took back on d4, there's a tactic here, which is another thing that often happens when one side has worse development than their opponent, and it involves a checkmate pattern, and it's knight takes d4. The point being, white cannot recapture this knight because of the checkmate threat on g2. Always worth bearing in mind the checkmate patterns to see tactics like this. So the moral of the story really is that when you have better development, as in the starting position, look to open the center. If you enjoyed that last example, then you're going to love what's coming up in the rest of the video. But before we move on, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the future videos that I'm preparing for you. Now on to lesson number 2, which is all about closing the area of the board where your opponent is trying to play. Our model game here is Spassky versus Petrosian 1966, actually part of the 1966 World Chess Championship. And if we orient ourselves to the position, we can see that we've got opposite side castling here. White is castled on the king side, whereas black is castled on the queen side. And in opposite side castling positions, it's very often very sharp and double-edged. Both sides can push pawns on the opposite side of the board, not fearing for their own king safety. So white is launching a pawn storm on the queen side, while black does the same on the king side. Now, black to move here, and I think many players with the black pieces would just continue attacking white on the king side, something like h3, or maybe bringing the other rook over to g8. But what Petrosian did here instead was a move that really stood out to me. Petrosian was a famously prophylactic player, so he would look to try and make sure that he wasn't putting himself in any danger before carrying out his own plans. So the move that Petrosian played here was a6. Now the idea of this is to be able to close the queen side at will. So now if white pushes ahead with b5, then black is able to push ahead with a5, and vice versa. If white plays a5, trying to open up the queen side, then black can keep it closed with b5. And if black can keep the queen side closed, then black has a free hand to attack the king side without worrying about being attacked themselves on the queen side. Let's just see a few moves of the game, because that's exactly what happened. So after a6, white played king to h1, and then black looked to get their forces into better and better positions. And then eventually white did play a5, and black just closed the queen side. The rest of the game is worth looking at, but essentially white was just unable to get any attack going on the queenside and just had to go defensive. Eventually, black was able to get their forces, break through on the kingside, and win the game. So remember this, whichever side of the board your opponent is trying to play, look to close that area of the board in order to frustrate their plans. Lesson number 3 is to target outposts within the enemy camp. Now, by definition, an outpost is a square which cannot be attacked by one of the enemy pawns. So this makes it a great place to put one of your pieces if you can get it there. And such a situation occurred in the game Furman vs Smyslov 1949. Black to move here, and black played f5, which is very aggressive, looking to attack white's centre. But the problem with this move positionally is that it leaves behind the e6 square, which is now an outpost that white can target. Before, when the pawn was back on f7, the f-pawn defended the e6 square, but now that it's moved ahead to the f5 square, white can get a piece into the e6 square with the plan bishop to d7 followed by bishop to e6. And that's exactly what happened. So starting with bishop to d7, black played queen to e5, and white wasn't even worried about losing the pawn on e4. Instead, white focused on creating dark square problems for black with bishop to c3. Now the idea is that the light squared bishop is going to make it into e6, and white is also wanting to trade off the dark squared bishop to weaken black on the dark squares as well. So black did win this pawn, but after bishop to e6 check, followed by bishop takes g7 check, you can see how exposed the black king is becoming. And white looked to amp up the pressure with queen to a3 with the idea of coming into c3, and black looked to defend, but now white continued the initiative with rook to c7, now targeting the e7 pawn. So white has got a lot of initiative here. Notice that black can't defend with rook to f7 because it would just get captured. This bishop on e6 is causing black a whole manner of problems. Let's run through a few more moves. So white won the pawn back, and eventually, after blocking the back rank checkmate threat, we got some maneuvering where white was able to win another pawn tactically with the move knight takes g6 check. Now the point is that if you take this knight with the pawn, then it's going to be checkmate via rook to h3 mate. The queen is pinned, so it can't block. And even if it could block, it would just get lost. But it can't, so it's checkmate. So what happened in the game instead was that the queen had to take, but now this gives white a very strong discovered attack, capturing this knight, regaining the material. Now white is actually a pawn up, and after black blocked with the queen, white actually looked to trade queens and is now a pawn up and went on to win in an endgame. But this entire sequence began with putting this bishop on the e6 outpost, and you can see how many problems that caused black. Now, if you're looking to improve your own positional play, just to let you know that I help ambitious adults at the below 2000 ELO level improve their results in chess. So if that sounds like you, if you're looking to improve your results in the game, then click the link in the description below. We can set up a time to chat. I can tell you all about the Road to 2000 Chess Improvement Program and see if that's a good fit for you and your chess goals. Lesson number 4 is to trade off the defender of the weak square. Our model game here is Alekhine versus Floor 1931. And white is better in this position because of white's development advantage. White's just played rook a to c1, attacking the black queen, and in the game, black played queen to b8. Now, how should white play in such a position to continue to push the advantage? Well, the type of advantage that you have often points to the correct plan. So since white has a development advantage, white should be looking to continue to accentuate that development advantage, in particular by making it hard for black to develop. So what does black want to do? Well, black wants to play the light squared bishop off its starting square, either with bishop to d7 or bishop to b7. Now, to restrict that light squared bishop, white would like to be able to play knight to c5, but the problem is that if you play knight to c5 straight away, well, black can take it. And probably the light squared bishop will be able to get off its starting square, and black will be fine eventually. That's why in the game, Alyakin looked to trade off this defender of the c5 square via bishop to c5. Now, after the bishop captures, the knight does get to c5, and black has a lot of problems. The bishop can't go to d7 because the a6 pawn is lost. And actually, if it goes to b7, then it's the same problem. The a6 pawn is just short of a defender. So the knight on c5 just makes it very hard for black to finish their development. If you see the rest of the game, you'll see how Alyakin was able to go on and turn his positional dominance into an eventual tactical win. But I think this is enough to prove the point. The knight on c5 is very strong. It makes black's plan of trying to develop difficult, and that's enough to understand that removing that defender of the weak square was the right plan for white. Lesson number 5 is all about invading on the 7th rank. Now this will be illustrated from a position from near the end of the game Rubinstein versus Morosi, 1920. White to move here, and white played queen to e6. Now for one thing, this is an offer of a queen sacrifice, which if black wins the queen will result in black losing the game with rook to d8, because this will be a back rank checkmate. But of course, black is not forced to take the queen, and instead in the game moved away with rook to f8. But what queen to e6 also does is it supports an invasion on the 7th rank. So white's follow-up was rook to d7. So now the threat is pawn takes g7 check, winning decisive material. And if black looks to trade rooks, then that doesn't actually solve black's problem at all. And in fact, it probably makes it even worse, because now there's two threats. There's the threat of taking the queen and still the threat of taking on g7 with check. So in the game, black instead captured on h6, but now white's next move was very clever. Another sacrifice via bishop to h4. The point being that if the bishop is taken, then white continues to invade on the 7th rank with queen to e7, and now there's no way to stop the threat of queen takes h7 checkmate. In fact, it's a forced mate in 3. There's also the threat of queen to g7 checkmate. So black is busted here, which is why after bishop to h4, black resigned. But you can see just how difficult it became once white was able to invade on the 7th rank. Now to get to this point, white had to outplay black positionally first, but the finish is interesting as well. Just how once white was able to get their pieces onto the 7th rank, black was eventually just defenseless. Lesson number 6 will demonstrate the power of the Queenside majority, which is a very important positional concept to be aware of, particularly if you play certain openings. Now in the game Botvinnik versus Kmoch 1934, it was white who had the queenside majority, with 3 pawns on the queenside versus 2 black pawns. Now what white will be aiming for eventually is to push their c-pawn. White can't do it yet because black has got too much coverage on that square, so white has got to prepare it, and let's see how Botvinnik did it. It started with a very clever move, knight to b5. Now this comes with a threat, bringing the knight into d6, which is something that black just simply can't allow. So black had to capture this knight, and after this, let's take a look at the transformation. Before this move, black had a bishop which guarded the c6 advance, and after the capture, that bishop is gone, and white has now got a bishop helping the c-pawn move forward. Let's see a few more moves. Black is trying to get their own play going on the king side, but now white plays bishop to d7, just making room now for b5 to be played. And there it is, b5 is played. And you can just see how white is playing with this plan. Everything is geared towards the c6 advance. The bishop, the knight, the rook, also now the pawn on b5. It's all in support of eventually playing c6 and the queenside majority breakthrough. Another move here from black, and there it is. c6 is played. Now, black could capture, but it actually wouldn't make a difference because still white is going to end up with this pawn on c6. Eventually there's going to be c7 and, well, c8 equals queen, and black will just have to give up decisive material. In the game, black tried to play rook to h6, but after king to h1, black actually just resigned because there was no good way to stop the c7 advance. So remember this idea. When you have the queenside majority, that can often be the correct plan. How do you recognize it? Well, it's by counting the number of pawns that you've got on the queenside versus your opponent. Such as here, you can even use this as a model game to recognize the queenside majority. Just count the number of pawns of you and of your opponent, and that could be a great way to cause your opponent a lot of problems, just like Botvinnik was able to do in this game. Lesson 7, the minority attack. Now this is an essential positional idea to be aware of, particularly if you play 1d4 with the white pieces. Because if you play 1d4, black will often respond with the following pawn structure: b7, c6, d5. Very solid, and for white to be able to make progress, white needs to be able to break this pawn structure up. And how can white do it? Well, we'll see an example of how in the game Floor versus Irva, 1932. In this position, with white to move, white played the typical minority attack pawn break with b5. Now, whatever black does here, black is going to end up with a weak pawn. Let's say that black were to allow white to capture, let's say with queen to a8. So now once white captures on c6, if black recaptures with the b pawn, then the c6 pawn is going to be a backward pawn and therefore weak. And if black instead recaptures with the rook, well, once white moves out of the way, then this pawn will be isolated, this pawn will also be a target, and yeah, eventually white will be able to win one of those black pawns. But in the game, black instead was the one to initiate the capture via a takes b5. So white took back, black took back, and you can see now that black is saddled with these two weak pawns, these two weak isolated pawns, which white can add pressure to. Let's see how. Well, black played b6, just trying to defend the pawn an extra time, and white played queen to b3, so now there's two attackers on the d5 pawn and only one defender. So black looked to defend, and white just added more pressure with rook to b1. Very simple plan. So now the threat is to capture on b6, and if black defends with rook to b8, well then d5 will be short of a defender. So in the end, black played rook to d7, white won a pawn, and white went on to win the game. So remember this plan. Whenever you see this pawn structure, you need to break it up if you're playing with white or with colours reversed. But the point of the exercise is to show how that you can create weak pawns on the queenside and then look to target them once they've become isolated and weak. When you outplay your opponents positionally, it'll often lead to a favourable attacking position. So I'd suggest watching this video next to learn more about attacking chess. I really think it'll help complete your education and improve your results.